we will be talking about how to uplift the United States indigenous rights and how to build movement. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Mariana Kimi. I'm from the New Savvy People, and I work at the advocacy program here at Cultural Survival. Today, we're going to have with us Joshua Cooper. I'm going to introduce him in a few minutes. Right now, I would like to remind you of some important things. First, that this event is being live streamed on our Facebook page and on YouTube. And also we have interpretation available in Spanish. So you can find it, I think, at the bottom navigation bar. It's a little globe, so you can turn on the Spanish interpretation there. Tenemos interpretación. Si ustedes están viendo este webinario en español, pueden ponerlo en inglés con la función de interpretación. I'm going to be speaking in English this time. And yeah, we're going to start now. Cultural Survival is a 53-year-old Indigenous rights, Indigenous-led organization. We are based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but we have staff all over the world. So right now, I'm here in Oaxaca at the south of Mexico. And yeah, our mission is to uplift Indigenous voices and also self-determination, cultures, political resilience. And we have our staff, as I mentioned, in many countries. Right now, we are almost 50 people working, so we're happy to uplift the voices of Indigenous peoples. And yeah, I'm going to start introducing the topic, and then I'm going to introduce Joshua Cooper, who is our panelist for today. So in preparation for the United Nations Human Rights Council's third Universal Periodic Review of the United States in November 2025, we are holding this training for tribal members and community activists. The Universal Periodic Review is a process conducted at the United Nations in Geneva that reviews each UN member state's record with regard to its human rights obligations and commitments. The US record is scheduled to be reviewed in November 2025, and civil society is encouraged to submit stakeholder reports outlining the issues affecting their communities in regards to international human rights standards. So now I'm going to introduce our amazing speaker. His name is Joshua Cooper. He's a professor at the University of Hawaii, West Oahu, Kapolei, and director of the Hawaii Institute for Human Rights. He will guide us to prepare the reports for submission for this Universal Periodic Review session. And I'm going to give you a little bit more of information about his background. I think it is worth it because he's an expert in this topic, so it's really great to have him here. He's also an academic advocate, author, analyst, and activist based in Hawaii. And he currently serves as the Dean of Global Leadership Academy for Human Rights Advocacy in Geneva, Switzerland. He holds positions of Senior Global Advocacy Manager, Senior Director of Communications and Community Engagement, Senior Director of Global Governance and International Initiatives. He has participated as an official observer at the United Nations meetings in both the Charter and treaty bodies of the human rights machinery for over a decade. He also assists in diplomacy engagement on climate change and sustainable development. So thank you, Joshua, for being here. We really hope that all your expertise and knowledge can help our brothers and sisters in the US advocating for their rights using this United Nations mechanism. So without further ado, I'm going to give you the floor. Thank you.
Aloha, and thank you all, and aloha. Welcome to our first event, and it's so exciting to discuss with you and be able to share what is happening at the UN regarding the Universal Periodic Review. It's so exciting to share with you because this will be the 4th review of the United States that will take place on November 10th. And so it is an honor to be with you all today, and we thank you very much. We welcome you to this important session, and it's exciting to be able to share with you what's going on regarding the Universal Periodic Review. And it's an honor to be coming to you from Hawaii. It's a little earlier here, but we're so excited to share with you the important parts about what's going on with the Universal Periodic Review. The exciting part is no matter where you are, no matter how prepared you are, we will be able to work with you through the next couple of weeks, throughout the next couple of months, through April 7th, to assist so that you'll be able and be prepared to be able to submit what really is what matters most to you, what you care about, what you want to share, and why it's crucial. So we will be able to work with you in community, in nations, and around the country, and even sometimes in the diaspora, to be able to help. So we look forward to doing that with you and going from there. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to sharing with you about the Universal Periodic Review. First and foremost, the UPR is a review of every country that's going to be reviewed, and that happens every 4.5 years. So the last time the United States was reviewed was in 2020. It was a time there many of us were active, we're coordinating, and then of course, COVID arrived. So we did have to get a little bit creative, and we started doing virtual Geneva sessions and organizing activities throughout the country to make sure that the world was aware of what we cared about. But what's most important about the Universal Periodic Review is how comprehensive it is. It allows us to coordinate to build a human rights movement across the nation that focuses on what matters most to us. And by focusing on what matters most to us, we're able to then make sure that the agenda and the actual review represents the voice of the people. Obviously, if you look at what's going on in the world, there will be a lot of people wanting to say a lot to the United States of America on November 10th, later this year, when they're reviewed in that 3.5-hour review process. What we want to do is to make sure that the will of the people, that what we want is brought up. We definitely can raise what is wrong, and there is so much, but this is also our chance to coordinate a campaign that reflects the rights that we care about the most, and to begin to organize for those. And what's exciting too, as we're meeting today, is we can all share and begin to network and see the commonality and to coordinate. We don't have to wait for things coming out from DC. This is our chance to be able to prioritize what matters most to we the peoples. And of course, today's Valentine's Day, and it's all about love, and love is a human right. In Hawaii, it's a little different. That was the day James Cook did not continue living on this earth. But it's Valentine's Day, so we want to point out that love is a human right, and that's where we really come from, is we're trying to create a movement of love, respect, dignity for all people. And we know that, of course, has been denied for too long. So the UPR, just to break it down, the most simple way is it's exciting because it allows us to teach about everything at the UN, because everything can actually be covered. Everything that you're interested in can be covered and raised and shared. And so it's anything that's in the UN Charter. So the UN Charter, very important document, especially we look at the time that it was created. It was coming out of World War II. It was looking at what had happened with just one Holocaust that the world began to recognize. But it was most important that it said never again. It was that spirit of San Francisco where the world met to create the UN. They met from April 25th to June 26th and crafted the UN Charter. That was the first time that it said, we the peoples, but most importantly, it said all peoples everywhere on earth, no matter where you're born, has human rights. So that no longer is a situation where government should or could, they must defend human rights. They have a duty bearer role, and we, the people, are the rights holders. So that was quite significant. Human rights was mentioned 7 times. What's also crucial, especially with what we're looking at today, is the right of self-determination. Self-determination for all peoples. It was looking at decolonization. It was looking at changing that situation where people have been subjugated under racial superiority and supremacy. It was saying we have to find a new way for humanity to live with one another. So that spirit of San Francisco was crucial. Human rights mentioned 7 times, self-determination listed. So that meant that we, the people, should also stand up for one another. There was that sense of solidarity that if we saw a human rights violation taking place somewhere else, be it in our community, be it at the capital level, be it in global civil society, we all should stand up and fight together, because it pointed out that if anyone's rights are denied, all of our rights are denied. So it was quite a significant moment. So anything in the UN Charter can be used. So on indigenous rights, we can talk about self-determination. We can bring those issues up. It's a vital space that we can organize in. Second one is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So when they were meeting in San Francisco, what was significant and why it's excited to all be here together is it was the first time civil society, we the people, were involved. 42 NGOs were participating from the US, and many were meeting with the delegation, which was led by Eleanor Roosevelt at the time. And that's significant, right? That's building on the 4 freedoms that Roosevelt had shared in 41 on January 6th, no less, where it was freedom from fear, freedom from want. Those are economic, social, and cultural rights that we have to have: water, food, education, healthcare, all that's sacred, that indigenous peoples know, that the rest of the world is beginning to understand. That is absolutely crucial. But also, besides the freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom of speech, freedom of worship, noting that sense of the sacred, that's absolutely so crucial as well. We see that with water protectors. We see that with the issues. Agnes made a joke one time when I was doing one of these. I was at the top of Haleakala, there with Mauna Loa and Mauna Kea in the background, where they had the struggle for making sure there's not another telescope being developed on Hawaii Island. So all these issues are connected. So that was exciting to have freedom of worship, freedom of speech, freedom from fear, freedom from want. Eleanor Roosevelt brought those 4 freedoms to the discussions, and she worked as the chair of the Human Rights Commission. The Commission on Human Rights met up until 2006. Now, the body that replaced it is the Human Rights Council. And the Human Rights Council, when it was replacing the Commission on Human Rights after 60 plus years of service, knew they had to do something better. People were saying it was just going to be the same wine in a different bottle. And one of the things they came up with was this universal periodic review. This universal periodic review said every country, everywhere on earth would be reviewed. And so far in the 4 cycles, every country has appeared. No country has not appeared. So I know some people have been looking in the news, and it's been saying that we're withdrawing from the World Health Organization, we're withdrawing from UNESCO, all those aspects, that we won't participate in the Human Rights Council. But every country has always participated in the UPR. So that's important. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is super important for us because it has economic, social, and cultural rights, plus civil and political rights. So when that was adopted in 1948, Eleanor Roosevelt was the chair of the commission. So it's important to point out, this isn't something from somewhere else. This is actually the obligations and the duties that the government has to its people. It's not some other countries telling you what to do or how to do it. This is an example of we the people not only naming and shaming this regime, which needs a lot of that these days, but framing and claiming our rights and demanding them through this UPR, and really doing what we should be doing anyway, not getting distracted by the silver things in the water that are popping out of the White House, but looking at talking to one another and determining what we care about the most and coordinating campaigns around those rights. Rights-based approach is what we're doing to make sure that we can change the conditions in our community and at the global civil society level. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, on top of the UN Charter, we can use anything there. Now that's important for one reason. The US has a horrible record of ratification. So when we're getting out of all these international instruments, that's nothing new. We've been horrible at the time. And that's actually why the Democrats invited the 42 NGOs. They wanted them to go to that meeting in San Francisco, return home to Kansas, return home to communities and say how important this meeting was and how crucial it was. And so there's always been that tendency. So we don't have to get overwhelmed by that. We just have to organize well around these human rights that are enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So the UDHR, 30 articles, first time ever, civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights together. And what's important for us, as I was getting to, is that the US has not ratified 7 of the 10 conventions that the rest of the world, majority of the countries have ratified. One of those is the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So because the UPR process takes place, for those 3.5 hours, we can cite an article in the UDHR, right to food, right to water, right to health, education, and cite that article and still be able to raise it. Whereas it's difficult to raise in other settings where the US has not ratified that instrument. So we get to talk about anything in the UDHR, but then the 3 things that we have ratified, which work very closely for what we all care about. Number 1, the ICCPR, the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The ICCPR's Common Article 1 with the ICESCR, that Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and that is self-determination, Article 1. So we can bring up self-determination to pursue and determine one's political destiny and pursue economic, social, and cultural development based on one's own cultural values. Absolutely crucial and essential. Also a good one on land that comes under there as well that you might want to read. So crucial there, ICCPR, but also Article 27, looking at right to culture, language, all those are there. But each one of those, in a way, are the toolkits of democracy to be able to demand our rights: freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of belief, freedom to meet, to speak, to coordinate, to run for office. All those things, the civil and political rights, are what we have to utilize. And those are what we have to make sure there's guardrails on this government. And to go back to some of those that maybe we've overlooked in the past or taken for granted. So the ICCPR is one. The second one, CERD, sounds like a breath mint. It's the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, CERD. CERD is a very important one as well as we look at CERD. And it has many articles. It was originally looking at issues around apartheid in South Africa. And since we got someone who grew up in that regime, who's now cutting all of government and services, it's important to see what CERD was looking at. It is a crucial document. And you can take any article of CERD and utilize and bring that forward. The other one that's important is known as the CAT. Small animal, of course, but it's the Convention Against Torture. The CAT is also crucial. And we've been utilizing CAT in new ways, bringing up issues of how denying basic fundamental freedoms is actually amounting to cruel, inhumane, and indecent treatment, and even amounting tantamount to torture. We've done this even with land rights cases under the CAT committee with other countries in Southeast Asia, pointing out if you remove indigenous peoples from their land, it's equal to torture, not just things that happen in cells in Guantanamo and other places like that. So those 3 treaties, we can review those in future sessions and pull the articles from those first 3 sets of human rights documents. Number 1, the UN Charter. Number 2, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And number 3, anything the US has ratified. And then this is where it gets exciting with the UPR. Anything that a UN human rights special procedure, and we've learned about those because many of them have visited the United States, both formally and informally. We've had many rapporteurs who have been crisscrossing the United States on indigenous rights. Very much Jim Anaya would be doing that. We've also had Francisco Cali, the Mayan from Guatemala. We've had many different special rapporteurs on indigenous peoples. But what's exciting, special rapporteurs, independent experts, and working groups, such as Working Group on Business and Human Rights, which we were very instrumental in organizing around, put pressure. When these guiding principles were created just on business and human rights, we were then able to push for the resolution to create not only beyond a one person who was John Ruggie, but to push for a working group of 5 representatives from every region. And the first document they wrote was actually looking at indigenous rights. So absolutely crucial to see how all this works. And then also independent experts, special rapporteurs, and working groups. There's over nearly 4 dozen thematic ones. And anyone that has written anything that is valuable to us, we can take from those reports and utilize that in our work for what we care about. So it's also a chance to share with people. Not everybody knows what a rapporteur is. They might think it's something hot for Valentine's Day. What is a rapporteur and what are we doing? But it's just an expert, it's a reporter, it's an independent person who has a mandate based on a theme. So I just talked about business and human rights. We talked about indigenous, but there's right to water, clean and healthy, sustainable environment, women's rights, education. 44 of them exist and allows us to take that strong language, because what they do is they are always looking at the evolution of rights. It's not static from 1945 with the Charter, 1948 with the Declaration, or those conventions that have taken place. It's a chance for us to, as you can hear, some whistles to wake up our fellow people across the country to say, these are our rights. And this body, the UN, these rapporteurs are crisscrossing and they're doing great work. They, in fact, even wrote a letter, all the former ones who are from the US, to say the concerns they have with the recent actions of the administration, documenting in each case those rights. So they're people who are volunteers but care deeply and are always involved. So that's an important angle that we can bring up. Also, UN agencies, programs, or funds. People aren't really that familiar with them. People are learning about them as we're withdrawing from them. But the only one most people know about is UNICEF around trick-or-treat time with Halloween, when it used to be about the candy and not so much the eye candy and everybody going crazy these days with outfits. But what's important with UNICEF, what's important with UNESCO, what's important with World Health Organization, all those are doing important work on the ground. They are involved here, even in the US, great work by UNESCO. They created a children-friendly and youth-friendly UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. That was like a magazine with photos and graphics. So these UN agencies are great. And I'd say there's two things that we think of when we bring up a recommendation around these agencies. Number one is to stop something bad. If the government's doing something bad in a space, we can utilize those UN agencies as well as those 4 examples I've mentioned earlier to then stop something, to cease it immediately, to not create greater harm. But the other side is we might have great projects that we are doing, things that we've created in our community that should be scaled up, that should have more resources, that should be supported. So that's important. Number one is to stop something that's bad that we know has to. The other is to scale up and to make better. So an example of that is it's the UNESCO Decade of Indigenous Languages. That's an example where many communities have been able to coordinate. We see the languages coming alive, especially here in Hawaii with Olelo Hawaii. What we can do and what we can coordinate is learn from there and make sure that we can stand up and demand justice using these UN agencies as well. But they also have great content because they're looking at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which we'll get into. They're looking at all those examples. So anything a UN agency says, and then also, it's quite important, as we all know, the US has always been a nation that's gone and colonized other places, that's used soldiers and troops, especially here in Hawaii for the illegal overthrow in 1893. But anything under international humanitarian law, Geneva Conventions, those can also be raised. So we can also bring up when they're violating and operating extraterritoriality in other places around the planet. So this allows us also, if the soldiers are doing things in other places, that we then use the international humanitarian law. So this is absolutely important. This is good, and we can coordinate from there. Those are all of the rights embodied in the UPR, which is great, because normally the US will be a review under a treaty body. The difference really simply between a treaty body reviews and a UPR reviews, treaty body will have a group of committee members from 10 on CAT to 23 on CEDAW. And we have to lobby those experts and work with them. This one is a little bit more exhilarating, exciting, expansive. 193 countries can ask questions of the United States. Actually, 195. Palestine and the Holy See can raise these questions. So unlike the other situation where we're just lobbying and advocating with a small group of experts, this case we're lobbying with all the countries in the world to give the recommendation to the United States. So this is the process of what we're looking at and how we coordinate. Just a sidebar, we're looking at 195 countries who can all be able to ask questions and make recommendations. So what we're going to look at between now and April 7th, that's when the stakeholder report is due. So the UPR review of 3.5 hours is based on 3 documents. Number one, everything we write, whatever we submit on April 7th goes to the UN, to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So that's kind of exciting. I work with my students on this. I work with community members. We're now working with City and County of Maui. What do you care about? If national is doing horrible things, subnationally, we have to even organize at that government level. But this allows us to frame and claim our rights and bring those up. And anything submitted on April 7th goes to the UN. It will be there on the UN website under the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for the review of the United States. What ACLU writes, what Amnesty International writes, is up there with what anyone writes and drafts. So this is an exciting opportunity. Great to see people from Michigan on. That's an important space. I know Amnesty is organizing a conference there. They're having their annual general membership meeting in Detroit next weekend. It's a great space for people to get together and to coordinate. So what we can look at, what we can do is be able to draft 5-page document if it's just you as an individual, but 10-page in coalition. So what's exciting is we can organize in working groups by themes. It can be one broad one, Indigenous rights. It could be one on water rights. It could be one on any aspect of what you want to create and to coordinate. So what's exciting is it's definitely not a laughing matter, but what it is actually making sure of what matters most and putting that on the global agenda. So anything we put and write in there goes to the UN, and it is summarized into a 10-page document and one of the official texts. What's also important is the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights also drafts one. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights drafts a document that's 10 pages long as well. So they look at anything that has ever been said to the US through a treaty body, anything that a special rapporteur has said in a visit. They look at when the High Commissioner for Human Rights speaks. So usually in a week, it'll be kind of important. The UN Human Rights Council will start its session. When the UN Human Rights Council starts its session, on the opening day, the High Commissioner for Human Rights will give a speech, and that person will then highlight violations. I guarantee to you, on that opening day, on the 24th of February, the United States will be mentioned with all the other worst countries about what they're doing related to their people. Too many issues taking place today that have to be addressed and that will be mentioned by the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So they take all of that, anything a High Commissioner has said, anything a rapporteur has said, and they make a report. So that makes 20 pages of text. Then the United States gets to write their report. That'll be due later this summer, and they'll turn in their report. And usually it's like the treaty bodies. It's always a glowing thing of how much money they spend, how great they are, how good they're doing in all these aspects. But what we will be able to do and what we'll be able to share is we'll be able to get the first word. We'll be able to turn in those documents on April 7th, either a 5-page one individually. So I, as Joshua Cooper, can write one. You can write one. Cultural Survival can write one. U.S. Human Rights Network can write one. Or we can also then write multiple 10-page ones based on themes and submit those that then reinforce the rights that we write about as individuals. So it's an exciting time. What we do now, between now and April 7th, is we go out and speak to the community, sort of share what I've just shared with you. What is the UPR? How expansive is it? What does it cover? What can it do? What can it do? And then also give the timeline of April 7th being the deadline to turn in our reports, to submit those to the High Commissioner for Human Rights office in Geneva. But that's just the beginning. So that's known as the preparation phase. The preparation phase is between now, April 7th. It's mainly about education, empowerment, and engagement, getting as many people in the country knowing about their rights. Right now, roughly only 10% know about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Even less probably know about the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. But it's every declaration, every convention, every covenant. We can raise all that. So that's exciting to be able to raise that. The next phase is interaction. Interaction runs a really long time. It runs from April 8th all the way up to November 9th. But what we're going to do this time is we're going to get creative. Two things we're going to do. From there, we take the 5 or 10-page document, we make it a 1 to 2-pager. That will be what's the issue, what's the question you want asked related to that issue, And most importantly, what's the recommendation? A really super smart recommendation, specific, measurable, action-oriented results, and a timetable. You don't want to make it vague. You want it to capture your voice, to capture your values, and to capture your vision for a better country and world. This is our chance to be able to put what matters most to us on the national agenda and for the world to know what we want. And so this is our chance. So you do a 1 to 2 pager for each issue you have. And that 1 to 2 pager is the main tool we have. That is what we hand to governments, and we meet with governments all the time. So I saw that there's many people excited about SEED, the Commission on Status of Women, CSW. That's actually an important meeting coming up March. In April, there'll be the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. For each one of those meetings, it's a great time to start reaching out and talking to the countries. We'll host side events and we'll say, aloha, we're here. We're at the Commission on Status of Women for 2 weeks. We're at the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. We'd love to begin talking to you and having a dialogue. And this is important. What we're doing is a favor to these governments. They want to ask good questions. Many of them are champions of human rights, certain specific issues. What we do is we use this toolkit known as the UPR Info, Universal Periodic Review Info website. It's got a great database. It's wonderful. You look up your issue that you care about. If you type up Indigenous Peoples, Mexico, Guatemala, Denmark, all those countries will have questions, more importantly, recommendations they've asked in the past. So you don't have to even make stuff up from scratch. If you're feeling you're not quite sure, you can actually just utilize that. So that's absolutely crucial and important in what we can do. But that allows you to sort of, it's a nice little cheat sheet, a nice little way to concisely see which countries care about what you care about. That means when you write them, it's not just a cold call like, hey, I was wondering if you might be interested. They are interested and they care. And the truth is, with every UPR review, so when we're reviewed November 10th, that's the Monday of the second week of the UPR 2-week process, they would love to hear from us because they are reviewing 13 other countries. 14 countries are reviewed 3 times a year. So this is a chance for us to be able to help them. We sort of spoon feed them a nice little big spoon of Nutella with all the richest recommendations they could ever imagine. And then we give that to them. They then look more intelligent. They look more informed. They look more interested. They also look like they know what they're talking about. So it's a partnership. We, civil society, provide the firsthand knowledge they could never get in a book, in a newspaper article. We're giving them fresh information, and that's the currency. The currency is your insights, your experience. And never forget, with the UPR, any UN process, you are the expert because you live and know the human rights violations of what have happened to you and our peoples for generations and what has to change to have a better future going forward. And so this is crucial. Everything that you have, you are the most important piece in this UPR process. I call the UPR Uniting People for Rights. So this then is what we do. We work between now on April 8th to November 9th with those 2 pagers of your questions that you want pushed to the US government and your recommendations. Because the exciting thing is in that next phase of the consideration after interaction, you get to listen to hear all the work you did. On November 10th, you will know, wow, I was in that meeting with Joshua on February 14th. I didn't know about this UPR before. I started getting involved. I talked to my community. We drafted a stakeholder report, a submission. We met with governments, and we're going to do some new things in this interaction phase that we hadn't done before. We usually just work in New York and DC. New York and DC is crucial. You meet with the embassies in DC. We host meetings at the law schools. We get to all speak up to 5 minutes to share with them exactly what we care about. And you frame it for them and then talk to them in private and in side sessions throughout DC neighborhoods. And we also do it in New York with the UN missions. That means you don't have to go to Geneva. Just get to New York and coordinate there. We've done great ones there. But what's so exciting also is we can actually coordinate. And now we're going to do something new. We're also going to be in Geneva at the Human Rights Council sessions in February, March, also in June, July, and also in September. But not everybody gets to Geneva, and everybody has to go to Geneva. If you look at the 5 phases, preparation, interaction, consideration, adoption, implementation, those 5 phases, the first 2 are the most important, the first and the last, and those all are at home. Preparation, everything's done at home. Implementation, it all matters how we take those recommendations we get November 10th and begin to implement them in our communities. So for interaction, before we get to the consideration, that 3.5-hour window, when we get to see the results of all of our hard work, what we do is we're going to do a new phase. Many people have heard about the global goals or the UN Sustainable Development Goals or the SDGs. It sounds like something you definitely don't want to catch on Valentine's Day. But the SDGs are 17 global goals. Those 17 global goals are all the economic, social, and cultural rights we care about that we haven't ratified in the ICESCR, which is the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And so what's crucial is it's no poverty, zero hunger, good health, well-being, quality education, gender justice, clean water and sanitation, everything. What was so crucial to Standing Rock, when we now have a lawsuit against Greenpeace, a slap suit by oil companies to then silence them, saying that was Greenpeace that organized, when we know as Indigenous peoples that led that one. And number 7, renewable energy. 8, decent work and economic growth. 9, innovation and infrastructure. 10, reducing all inequalities. Number 11 is looking at those important things of sustainable consumption, production, how we live, and then local, how we bring global goals on the ground, sustainable cities and communities. 13, 14, 15, it's climate action, life below water, life on land, seeing that holistic Indigenous perspective. 16, crucial, peace, justice, strong institutions. And 17 is essential. 17 is actually partnership. And that's what we're doing here today, partnership. So what we're going to do is from April 7th, when we turn in that, we're going to start focusing on the SDGs. We're going to say, hey, the US never did a voluntary national review under the previous administration. We're one of only less than a handful of countries that have not done something called a voluntary national review, saying how we're doing on those 17 goals, which are all very much economic, social, and cultural rights. We're going to do voluntary local reviews, VLRs. So the exciting point is if you're in Navajo Nation, if you're in Nevada, if you're in Nanakuli, where I grew up in Hawaii, wherever you are, you can do a voluntary local review. Meet with your mayor, meet with your government, meet with your governor, talk to them, talk to county council. Document how we're doing on these global goals. We're going to do something really simple. It's going to be number 1. What's good? What are we doing that's actually a positive that we can identify? Looking at the best practice we can find in our community for each one of those goals. I'll give you an example. Ma'o Farms is near where I grew up in Waianae. They created a farm that actually gives college credit, that actually creates jobs, that actually creates food in a space where it was definitely a food desert. I didn't know salad was green growing up. We only had back salad, which was white and full of mayonnaise. So it's bringing healthy food to the place where people had not had that space and turning the land into a healthy place. Ma'o Farms is one of the best examples. When Barack comes out for Christmas, when Michelle's out here, they go to Ma'o Farms to see that model in practice. So what we're doing with the Sustainable Development Goals is seeking out the best practice. We'll document that, we'll push it, because that way we can learn from each other and see if we can replicate and bring it to our place in its unique way. Number 2, though, we're going to say what is wrong. We're going to identify the worst case scenario, but identify up to 5 steps of what we can do to improve. What do we do and how do we change that? And going forward, what does that look like? That's absolutely crucial for us. We're going to do that. And then in July is the UN High-Level Political Forum, the UN HLPF. That'll take place in New York, July 21st through 24th. We can have voluntary local reviews together, sharing and combining in Indigenous nations, in our communities. How are we doing on these global goals? What can we learn from each other? How can we use number 17 partnership and do that together? So we're going to do that for Earth Day, starting in April until July. We're going to do voluntary local reviews. This allows us also to reach out again. If we didn't get to everybody before April 7th, we're going to say, hey, do you know there's a UPR? No. Well, we're going to do this aspect with the VLR. And the cool part is you can take then the VLR work we do, you'll have the issue, the question, the recommendations, and then shift. from July all the way through November 8th and 9th, we will take these documents with us and organize at the community level. There's honorary consulates in Honolulu, in Atlanta, in Boston, everywhere, San Francisco, LA, that we can talk to, meet with. And then this is a group that's never been engaged. They usually work on visas. They usually host film festivals. This is our chance to say, this is important. This is what we care about. This is what we think, and to coordinate that. So it's a super exciting opportunity of what we can do, how we coordinate. And that then sets us up for the third level, which is consideration. Consideration is a 3.5-hour review. This is the good thing. Anything said and everything said then goes into the final document. So then you know and I know how well we did starting today and what the results were. That'll be actually crucial and important. And then what we can do from there is then it's the next phase. From November 10th through February, March of next year, we push for adoption. We push for the country to adopt these recommendations. And that's why the next phase, the subnational, me working at Maui, coordinating, others working in Honolulu, others working in Navajo Nation. It's us organizing at that level to bring that forward, that our local cities, councils, our tribal governments, everyone can start implementing these recommendations. We don't wait for the national. We organize that. And we push also the federal, though, to adopt these recommendations. So it'll be an exciting 3.5-hour review. U.S. government always brings a delegation. This will probably be an extra rude delegation of arrogance that we've seen displayed in the last 3.5 weeks. But this is our chance to set the record straight. Then the adoption is agenda item number 6. 10 people will be able to speak. So you can sign up online and register there. There'll be more events in Geneva. There'll be more things we can do. That consideration was kind of like the Super Bowl, what we saw last week. It's the Kendrick Lamar halftime show. We can watch it. We can put it up on big screens and all see how well we did. Then we push for adoption between then and February, March. And then after the adoption of agenda item number 6 and 10 civil society from the US speak, then we go towards implementation and the cycle begins again. That's when the real work starts. So I really appreciate your patience for listening as we covered so much. We tried to break it down into 5 phases, which I know you know now: preparation, interaction, consideration, adoption, and implementation. We thank you so much for listening. We definitely can take some questions as well, but we thank you so much for tuning in. There'll be more before April 7th, and we'll be with you here to assist you in drafting and coordinating. So thank you so much for joining. We, of course, have what happens at every time anyone's doing an event. We have a leaf blower to try to silence us or muffle us, but that won't work. But good news, it looks like a pretty weak one. So we'll be able to do that. And thank you again so much for listening. And I'll stop there and wait for questions, but mahalo, and look forward to continuing partnering on our next webinar that we have set up and coordinating together in community. Also, if you ever do want, let me know. I will do anything to come anywhere to be able to assist your community prior to April 7th and from April 7th through November 10th. Absolutely pro bono, absolutely for free, sleep on the floor in your community and help. Like I said, next week is Amnesty International in Detroit. They're going to have a general meeting. So if you're in Flint and you had great work that you did on water, let us know. We'll do anything to help out. But mahalo, everyone, for your patience. I know it was a lot of information, but we tried to make it as simple and as succinct as possible and concise so we can be creative in our campaigns as we go forward. Mahalo.
Thank you so much, Joshua, for sharing all of this information with us. I know it's a lot, but sometimes it's very difficult to navigate through all of these mechanisms that exist internationally, specifically in the UN. So with this explanation, we really hope that more and more Indigenous peoples can do this report and look for more assistance and find other ways where we can resist due to the very complex political and social panorama that we're living right now in the US and internationally. So thank you again. And right now we're going to share a couple of questions. We have one from Angelica de Jesus. I'm going to read it now. She says, I'm Boricua in diaspora, and I'm curious, to what extent have communities in the so-called US territories successfully used UPR to support human rights and specifically land-based organizing? So if you could share a bit, please. We can't hear you. Josh, you're muted. Can you hear us, Josh?
I hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I was sharing the question that we have here. Do you want me to read it again?
Sure.
Yeah, so this is from Angelica de Jesus, and she is curious to know to what extent have communities in the so-called US territories successfully used UPR to support human rights and specifically land-based organizing?
So great. The exciting part is definitely in the territories in Puerto Rico and Guam, we're already starting the conversation. We can bring the human rights information there and coordinate. So this is an opportunity to bring up the situation because many places were also on list of decolonization. So this is a chance for us to connect and bring those issues forward. So also with climate justice, I know when I started, I had my climate justice t-shirt on underneath. There's a chance for us to coordinate in that space as well and bring those issues up because there's a special rapporteur on climate change and human rights, Maui with our wildfires, Puerto Rico with everything happening there as well, Guam with hurricanes and typhoons. This is our chance to point out how the fossil fuel companies, which are even more empowered now, 3 weeks later than we had ever imagined, are having horrible things. And we can look at the people who've been appointed to these positions. Unfortunately, the cabinet is just a who's who of what the hell. And if you look at the EPA, it's actually the people who used to, not even scientists, who used to just lobby to weaken the national standard. So this is a time for us to really speak up, to coordinate in those communities, to make sure that territories everywhere is covered. We don't leave any place untouched because we know, unfortunately, this government's policies impact everyone. So even American Samoa, we can coordinate and organize. So we could even organize if people are interested. I'd volunteer. One of the things we can do with cultural survival is we can have a territories and not continent review that we frame how places that are not in the continent are treated, pointing out Samoa not being able to vote, Puerto Rico, all those aspects, even link in DC with no representation, all those issues. So great question, and so glad that we could talk together and see what's possible. I can put in chat my email, because I know that was a lot, but I saw how great Cultural Survival is doing, sharing that information of what we had done in the past. There was a great article we wrote. What we'll try to do is maybe do an updated article. Agnes can let me know, as well as Mariana, and I promise to do an updated article that's simple, that brings out the 5 steps that point out what we can all do. So feel free to text, but we'll be here with Cultural Survival, assisting you throughout this entire process. Like I said, we'll do our best to help. We're even trying to do one in Boston together in March, 1 month from now in mid-March. But if your community would like one, and let us know, and we'll do everything possible to either do it remotely or to be there on the ground to assist before April 7th. But then if that's too soon, don't worry. There's all of the things we can do, because here's the good thing. People can participate at every stage. If you just get involved in the adoption stage, you at least just know all the recommendations, you have the numbers, and you can push for that recommendation. We've seen different groups, youth from LGBTQIA in Georgetown, push for their recommendation and get it adopted at the federal level, and the government come out early saying, due to the pressure, we're going to do this. We've seen sex workers organize in the first UPR review to get their recommendation adopted, 86. So anywhere you come in, if you come in November 11th, you can still be involved. But what we hopefully pointed out and shared with you today is if you come in now, you get to educate the community, you get to talk to the community, you get to build the community to then be able to start this national network on rights. And then you got to push it again on the Sustainable Development Goals from Earth Day on. And then you got to do more on the consideration. You got to have a viewing party, get everybody together. So at every phase, you can coordinate at the community, at the capital level in DC, and at the global civil society in Geneva and everywhere else. So very excited to be able to meet, very excited to be able to share. And thank you so much for the questions so far. And thank you for your patience with the leaf blower. That's what I was talking when you couldn't hear me. I was trying to negotiate with the leaf blower, but he was just determined to finish that. So I did my best to not bring that to you. So I did put my email up there before, Shahid. So you should be able to see it a little higher up, but it's real simple. It's just my name, Joshua Cooper, and then Hawaii, HAWAII @gmail.com. So thank you so much for that question. I'm ready for, I guess we got a couple more, and then we got at least 6 minutes, right?
Yeah, we have a couple of minutes left. And I see that there are many folks that are from some African countries. So maybe if you could share with us some of the information of when does these sessions happen for the revision of African countries specifically. Where can we find that information? Or if you can give us more information about how does this work for other countries?
Sure. So the best thing about the UPR is every country is reviewed and they follow the same calendar. So the cool part is every 4.5 years. It's not like the treaty bodies where it is just right before. You get it like a 6-month notice, maximum a year to be able to organize. This is great. It is 4.5 years. The calendar's out for the 4th cycle. So I'm not sure which African countries you're from, but all you do is look up UPR 4th cycle, and there's a calendar that lists every one, when it is, and then we can coordinate, and you just follow the same 5-step process, and we can help you in Africa. We've done indigenous rights campaigns. I'll tell you one fun story. So I had a friend I was working with in Kenya, and I talked to him a 1.5 years out, 2 years out. I said, oh my gosh, your country's being reviewed. Let's start now. We did a webinar, we talked, we did stuff at the permanent forum. He's always like, yeah, this is great. We're going to work. Just didn't get the emails from him, didn't miss the deadlines. I was like, oh man, I understand things are in community are difficult. Fun part though, shows up the night before the UPR in Geneva. Joshua, my brother, let's organize. I'm so excited. All that you taught us, let's do this. And I'm like, it's tomorrow afternoon. It's like, yeah, I'm here. We're ready. Best thing is we worked overnight. We got 6 recommendations in 24 hours of advocacy. We had one session when we worked with Guatemala. I loved working with cultural survivors. One of my best post-COVID moments. We went there to focus on the indigenous radio, on another recommendation from the regional bodies. And we were able to get so many recommendations by going there and working the room in Geneva. So no matter which country you are from, it's great that Cultural Survivor has a global reach. You use those same 5 phases and you look up on the UPR calendar what's there and coordinate that way.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Josh. Now we're going to the last question. I would really like to know what do you think, like in this very complex political panorama in the US now with this not so new president that we all know, Donald Trump, could you explain a bit on what are the consequences on him turning his back on international mechanisms and laws, and in what other ways can civil society resist and pressure the government?
Yeah, so I think what's exciting is you're seeing everybody stand up and starting to organize. It's of course a little too late. Like there is no way we should be where we're at. We knew how bad it was before, not making up stuff, but just what this person has said. So our message, I think, to the United States is the US should lead, not leave. On the other hand, if you see how bad this government is, it's good not to have them there because all they're going to do is weaken the international system even more. So it is absolutely catastrophic. I can't understate it. The US government cannot connect the damn dots. I'll never be able to retire from being a professor because for everything that this government says they want to do, all they're doing is undermining their own selves. But I think that's also an intent. You know, the system doesn't work almost intentionally sometimes too. And this is it. When the US government doesn't function and never did enough anyway at the human rights level with a record of only ratifying 3 out of 10 and not even ratifying the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which will also be reviewed, one of the optional protocols in March. That then allows other governments to say, why do we have to do it? US doesn't do it, why do we do it? So that leaving, that walking out, that just weakens the whole international order. That then allows other countries who want to weaken the international order, and now that's the same groups as the United States, Saudi Arabia, China, Russia, to also strip it down. So then the system that already was challenged because the weakness of the UN is its member states and they make decisions, is even, the bar's been lowered. So we have to really organize, but this is a good chance too. We get to see what it's like to be in a country that many indigenous peoples are in around the world that always have these conditions and circumstances where if you are a human rights defender, your life is at risk. And unfortunately, that's the environment and the climate we find ourselves in. So we have to get active. We have to have each other's backs. We have to stand shoulder to shoulder, and we have to demand a new direction. And there is no reason not to organize. On the other hand, I think it's going to move up sovereignty for Hawaii by at least 2 decades. If you have a choice, what do you want? Do you want to live in Hawaii, where we are with that value system of aloha? Or do you want a bully on a playground who has no compassion and humanity that even does anything political, even with wildfires in LA? Who do you want to live and how do you want to live? The indigenous way of life is a much more balanced, better way that shows what I think anyone would want for their keiki, their children,
it's
or for their neighbors. So we've got to see what it is. We've got to admit it's a racist nation, unfortunately, no matter how anybody else wants to put it. When you looked at 2 groups and 2 visions, we're in a bad place. And but it's what indigenous peoples have always known. So I do take strength from many of my colleagues who are like, this is nothing. We've done with much worse for centuries. So let's get busy and let's make the world a better place and build back better with a bold vision of what we all know matters most. So there's no reason, unfortunately, to sit around in shame for how bad this government is. It's about strengthening our community. And the UPR's that great chance. Otherwise, you'd be like, hey, do you want to talk about human rights? You know, what would you want to do? And people be like, but what are we doing it for? Where are we plugging it into? The UPR, the best thing about it, it allows us to mobilize and build a national network of human rights defenders and sharing that vision with everybody. And I'm very honored to be able to spend Valentine's Day with all of you and do that together. And hopefully that was much sweeter than any box of chocolate or macadamia nuts covered chocolates. And look forward to see you either at CSW or at the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Let's make that a date. We'll have our follow-up dates, at least at the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. We'll do more side events with cultural survival there. But like I said, if you really do want this and you think it's valuable to you, you let us know and we'll do everything we can to be able to be there with you and meet your community, because that's what we have to do, is show solidarity beyond anything we've ever seen before with what we face today. So sorry, that question could have taken a year to respond, but hopefully that's concise enough and shares a little bit of the sentiment of how I think all our hearts are feeling.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Josh. I think this was the perfect closing. I think despite all the awful things going on in the world, in the US and many countries, the most important thing is to have hope and to keep working to uplift the voices of indigenous peoples. And this is the best example of it. So thank you so much for being here with us today. And we're going to continue with these conversations in some other webinars. So don't forget to tune in our social media. And yeah, that was all. So thank you everyone to come here, and thank you, Josh. Thank you to everyone who made this possible.
Mahalo.